morning, dear students. Hope you're all doing well, right? I'm your English teacher in Vittal Matriculation School. Today, Wednesday. In last class, what we have seen? In last class, when the trees walked. Okay? Shall we continue? Last class, we are completing section 1, right? Today, we have to continue section 2. Let me read. Take your pencil. Keep it with yours. Listen carefully. Read this section silently. Underline the most important events of the story. Discuss what you have underlined with your partner. Did you underline the same sentences? Discuss in class. When schools are open, that time we will discuss about it. Okay, now we have to learn. What is the title of the prose? When the trees walked. Here, now we move on to the section 2. Right. Listen. Grandfather wasn't. Here, wasn't means was not. Was not, short form of wasn't. Grandfather wasn't content with growing trees in our compound. During the rains, he would walk into the jungle beyond the riverbed armed with cuttings and saplings which he would plant in the forest. But no one ever comes. No one ever comes here. I had protested. The first time we did this. Who's going to see them? Who's going to see them? See, we are here. This means we are. This is the short form of we are. Not planting them simply to improve the view, replied grandfather. We are planting them for the forest and for the animals and birds who lived here and need more food and shelter. Let me explain these 3 paragraphs. Listen carefully, children. Grandfather had a compound full of trees, right? But he was not satisfied. During the rainy season, he would go into the jungle, which was located beyond the riverbed. He would take pieces of plants and young trees for growing more trees in the jungle. He created a forest. Here jungle means forest. The first time when the author had accompanied him, he opposed. He asked him why he had to do this, as no one ever came to the jungle and nobody is going to see them. The wise grandfather replied that they were not planting the trees for good views, but for the following reasons. What is the reasons are? The reasons are the planting for the forest. He wants to create the forest. So, planting for the forest, for the animals and birds that live there and recure more food and shelter. Grandfather further added that humans also needed trees for the Following reasons. Following reasons. There are to keep the land fertile and not dry like a desert. To keep the land fertile and not dry like a desert. To bring more rain. To bring more rain. To bring more rain. To prevent the soil from getting eroded. To prevent the soil from getting eroded. To get more flowers. To get more flowers, fruits, leaves and seeds. To get more flowers, fruits, leaves, seeds. To get more wood. And finally we get more wood from the forest. And then of course, men need trees too, he added, to keep the desert away, to attract rain, to prevent the banks of rivers from being washed away, for fruit and flowers, leaf and seed. Yes, for timber too. But men are cutting down trees without replacing them, and if we don't plant a few trees ourselves, a time will come when the world will be one great desert. Let me explain this paragraph. Already we know the reasons, right? Again I'll explain you. To keep the land fertile and not dry like a desert, to bring more rain, then to prevent the soil from getting eroded. Then what we do? Then to get more flowers, fruits, leaves and seeds, right? To get more wood from forest. He finally said that people are cutting down trees without replacing them. If we cut a tree for any reason, we should make sure we replace by planting more number of trees. The grandfather says, if we cut a tree for any reason, that's no problem, but we should make sure we replace by planting more number of trees. If we don't plant a few trees for ourselves, the whole world will become a desert zone without any vegetation, rain or life also. The whole world will become a desert zone without any vegetation, rain or life. Okay, let me explain the hard words. Here content means satisfied or peaceful. Satisfied or peaceful. Then riverbed. Here riverbed means the channel in which a river flows. The channel in which a river flows. The channel in which a river flows. Then armed. Equipped with all items required. Armed means equipped with all items required. Then cuttings. A piece cut from a plant or propagation. Cuttings means a piece cut from a plant for propagation. Next, saplings. Here saplings means A young tree used to grow a new tree. A young tree used to grow a new tree. Saplings means a young tree used to grow a saplings means a young tree used to grow a new tree. Used to grow a new tree. New, new tree. Then protested means opposed. Opposed or disagreed. Opposed or disagreed. Next, let me read it. The thought of a world without trees became a sort of nightmare to me, and I helped grandfather in his tree planting with greater enthusiasm. And while we went about our work, he taught me a poem by George Morris. A poem by George Morris. Woodman spared the tree, touched not a single bough. In youth it sheltered me, and I'll protect it now. One day the trees will move again. One day the trees will move again, said grandfather. They have been standing still for thousands of years, but there was a time when they could walk about like people. Then along came an interfering busybody who cast a spell over them, rooting them to one place. But they are here. They are always trying to move. See how they reach out with their arms, and some of them, like the banyan tree with its traveling aerial roots, manage to get quite far. Let me explain it. As grandfather explained to the author, the thought of a world without trees became like a scary dream, became like a scary tree to him. So he helped his grandfather with planting trees with more interest and involvement. More interest and involvement. His grandfather also taught him a poem written by George Morris. The poet tells a woodman to let go of the tree that he is about to cut, and that he should not touch a single branch of the trees as it had sheltered him when he was young. It was the poet's turn to protect the tree now. Then the grandfather continued his explanation. He said one day the trees would move again. There had been a time when trees walked like people. Now let me read the paragraph. We found an island, a small rocky island in a dry riverbed. It was one of those riverbeds so common in the foothills, which are completely dry in summer but flooded during the monsoon rains. A small mango tree was growing on the island. If a small tree can grow here, said grandfather, so can others. As soon as The rain set in, and while rivers could still be crossed, we set out with the number of tamarind, laburnum, and coral tree saplings and cuttings, and spent the day planting them on the island. Now let me explain. The grandfather continued his explanation. He said one day the trees would move again. There had been a time when trees walked like people. A troublemaker came along and he used magical powers to stop them from moving and fixed them deeply in the ground. The trees have been standing motionless. The trees have been standing motionless for thousands of years because of the spell. But they will always try to move, explained the grandfather. He asked him, "See how far they have stretched out their arms." He quotes the example of the banyan tree, which has managed to move forward with its roots in the air. Laterly, they found a small island filled with rocks in a dry riverbed area which become very dry during summers but will get submerged in water during monsoon rains. They saw a small mango tree growing on the island. His grandfather said, "If a small tree can grow in such dry conditions, trees can grow anywhere." As soon as the monsoon set, the rains began. The rivers were not flooded because the rain had just started. So one could cross the river easily. They started with many saplings and cuttings of tamarind, laburnum, and coral trees and spent the whole day planting them on the island. Let me explain the hard words. Now see the glossary. Protested. Here protested means opposed or disagreed. Opposed or disagreed. Nightmare. Nightmare means a frightening dream. A frightening dream. Nightmare means a frightening dream. Interfering, stopping. Interfering, stopping. Here, do you know? The Western Ghats is home to nearly 325 globally threatened flora and fauna. The Western Ghats is home to nearly 325 globally threatened flora and fauna. Then section 3. Let me read it. I hope you all understood section 1 and 2. Now let's move on the section 3. Take turns and read this section aloud. Work in pairs, discuss, describe and list the 3 main events in this section. The monsoon season was the time for rambling about. At every turn there was something new to see. Out of the earth and rock and leafless bogs, the magic touch of the rains had brought life and greenness. You could see the broad-leaved winds growing. Plants sprang up in the most unlikely of places. A people would take root in the ceiling. A mango would sprout on the window sill. We did not like to remove them, but they had to go if the house was to be kept from falling down. Now let me explain this paragraph. The monsoon season has started. The monsoon season has started. The author says that monsoon was the time for rambling about. The time for rambling about. It means rambling in two senses. It means rambling in two senses. One refers to wandering about. One refers to wandering about. Wherever the author wandered in his city, he saw something new. He saw something new in every turn. The other meaning refers to the plants putting out long shoots and growing over walls or other plants. All the plants had sprung up out of the earth from leafless branches, fresh and new in rains during the monsoon. Then let me read. If you want to live in a tree, that's all right by me, said grandmother crossly. But I like having a roof over my head, and I am not going to have my roof brought down by the jungle. Then came the Second World War, and I was sent away to a boarding school. During the holidays, I went to live with my father in Delhi. Meanwhile, my grandparents sold the house and went to England. 2 or 3 years later, I too went to England and was away from India for several years. Let me explain these two paragraphs. Listen carefully. It symbolizes new life and lush green vegetation. The creeping trees with broad leaves in their garden grew up. Plants came out of unexpected place like people tree roots went into the ceiling. People trees went root into the ceiling. A mango plant sprouted in the windowsill. A mango plant sprouted in the windowsill. They did they did not want to remove them. They did not want to remove them, but they had to remove it. But they had to remove it. Otherwise, the house will fall under the weight of trees. Weight of trees. His grandmother said annoyingly that if they wanted to live in a tree, it was all right. But it was all right, but it was all right, but she wanted to have a roof over her head and not want the roof to be collapsed by the jungle. She expressed it sarcastically. Then, have you all understood? Some years later, I returned to Dehradun after first visiting the old house. It hadn't changed much. I walked out of town towards the riverbed. It was February. It was February. As I looked across the dry water course, my eye was immediately caught by the spectacular red blooms of the coral blossoms. In contrast with the dry riverbed, the island was a small green paradise. When I went up to the trees, I noticed that some squirrels were living in them and a coal, a crow peasant. A crow peasant challenged me with the Millo, who are you? Who are you? But the trees seemed to know me. They whispered among themselves and beckoned me nearer. And looking around, I noticed that other smaller trees, wild plants, and grasses had sprung up under their protection. Yes, the trees we had planted long ago had multiplied. They were walking again. In one small corner of the world, grandfather's dream had come true. This prose lesson was written by Ruskin Bond. Now I explain these two paragraphs. It was the time of the Second World War between 1939 to 1945. The author had been a school kid by then, and he was sent away to a boarding school. During his holidays, he went to Delhi to stay with his father. His grandparents had sold the house in Dehradun and moved to England. After 2 or 3 years, he also went to England and stayed away from India for several years. After some years of author returned to Dehradun. He visited the old house and it had looked almost the same. He walked to the outskirts to the riverbed. It was the month of February. He saw the dry riverbed and he immediately saw the striking red flowers of the coral blossoms. The riverbed was dry, but in contrast, the island looked like a small green paradise. The island looked like a small green paradise. He walked up to the trees and noticed that some squirrels, a coal crow peasant, were living in the tree. It seemed to him like they were all asking him who he was in a soft, smooth voice. The author felt the trees knew him. They seemed to murmur amongst themselves and the author felt the trees knew him. They seemed to murmur amongst themselves and signaled him to come closer to them. He also noticed that there were other smaller trees. Wild plants, and grass had emerged out under the shelter of the trees. The trees long back had increased in number. They seemed to be walking again. The author realized that his grandfather's dream had come true. Dreams had come true. Now let's see the glossary. Rambling, wandering. Sprout, when seeds begin to grow into small plants. Sprout, when seeds begin to grow into small plants. Spectacular, eye-catching. Beckoned, to signal someone with your hand, To ask the person to come closer or follow. To signal someone with your hand. To ask the person to come closer or follow. Now let me read about the author. Ruskin Bond is an award-winning Indian author of more than 500 books. 500 books, short stories, essays and novels. He writes poetry and books for children as well as adults. He lives with his adopted family in Landor, in Missouri, in India. In Landor, in Missouri, at India. He was awarded the Padma Shri in the Padma Shri in 1999 and Padma Bhushan in 2014. Ruskin Bond is an award-winning Indian author of more than 500 books, short stories, essays and novels. And then he writes poetry and books for children as well as adults also. He lives with his adopted family in Landor in Missouri at India. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 1999 and Padma Bhushan in 2014. Okay students, today our class is stopped here. Then tomorrow you have a test, okay? Don't forget. Tomorrow Thursday you have to write your test and go through well all these 3 sections. Okay students, keep safe at your home. Those who are all don't pay the fees, so kindly you have to pay the fees and take your notebooks and prepare for your test well. Thank you students. Have a worthful Wednesday. Thank you.